Hi, I'm a former higher ed CMO, and I have a confession to make. I honestly believe that a toxic work environment makes it really difficult to deliver student care on any sort of scale. And I think that as marketers, we are often communicating about a caring campus community without necessarily asking our colleagues for the evidence that that actually does exist. My guest for this episode is Kevin McClure. He is the author of The Caring University, which is such a fantastic read. He's also the Murphy Distinguished Scholar of Education and Associate Professor of Higher Education at the University of North Carolina at Wilmington. He writes the Working Better column for the Chronicle of Higher Education, and he's a must follow on LinkedIn with wonderful takes about workplace culture in higher education. This episode is chock full of great insights, and I know you're going to enjoy listening to Kevin. His previous episode is one of our best listened to on the podcast. So I hope you'll go back and listen to that one as well. And I hope you enjoy the show.
Often, what we think of as policy is not policy. There is no policy, or it's based on one person's interpretation of policy. So I've kind of made like my personal brand, just not trusting that policy is policy until like I actually see the physical policy and I read it. Otherwise, I'm going to keep on asking and saying, are we sure about this?
You're listening to Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO with Jaime Hunt, your source for insight and inspiration on the issues shaping higher ed marketing. From AI and branding to enrollment strategy and leadership, each episode explores the ideas, challenges, and opportunities facing today's marketing leaders. Let's get into it. I'm so excited to have you back on the show, Kevin. Your episode was one of the first ones I did. I think you were like in the first 10 episodes, but it's also one of my most popular episodes. So having you back on the show is fantastic. So welcome.
I love it. I'm excited to be back, and I'm a fan of the pod. So even more enjoyable when you get to be more actively part of the conversation. So let's do it.
I'm holding up your book. People listening can't see it, but this is such an important book, The Caring University. I remember when you talked about that you were writing it, I could not wait to get my hands on it. I think I pre-ordered it and got it before it was officially out. Like, fantastic book. And congratulations on getting that wrapped up. I know that's a huge endeavor.
Yeah, I imagine at the time that we talked and I was still in the thick of it, it was one of those things where you're wanting to bring this thing out into the world and you're just so full of excitement and anticipation and probably just in the drudgery of trying to get it finished. So being on the other side of it is lovely.
Yeah, I bet. So I want to start with a quote that inspired me to say, like, now is the time to have Kevin back on the show. So you recently posted a LinkedIn article, and the quote I'm pulling from it was, language can be powerful, but simply declaring that this is a place that cares about its people doesn't make it so. And I was like, yes, I didn't even like finish the rest before I messaged you and was like, please come on and talk about this. And I couldn't agree more. Like, that we have a lot of rhetoric around what we offer and how we care about people and all of that. And going further into the article, you're really arguing that there's a gap between the rhetoric of care and the lived experience of students. What do you mean when you say care rhetoric? Try to say that 10 times fast first. What do you mean?
I've said it so many times. I actually was laughing and wondering how many times I've said the word care or caring in the last year. It's got to be very, very high. But yeah, so an important premise of this book is that care requires institutional action. So it's institutional action in support of the well-being of employees. There are moments where people come to me and they share a hardship, they share news that is really troubling, and that moment calls for expressions of care. And sometimes that's purely in the form of language, purely in the form of pausing to listen and to give them space. And so that does matter. But what I have experienced is there are some institutions that lean really heavily on what we might think of as more kind of campaigns in the form of banners that say we care, or they might turn care into an acronym and lean heavily on that. But there's not really action associated with that, so that
Mhm.
if you were to talk to an employee on any given day and to say, can you name some institutional action that you think demonstrates care for your well-being, they would really struggle with that. And so for me, there can sometimes be a disconnect between some of those caring expressions that an institution might undertake with good intention, good reason. There's just not enough of that follow through to suggest to people, for the people who are working there, that this is a meaningful, substantive thing.
What does meaningful substantive care look like?
There's lots of different ways that I think this can take shape, and it's going to look a little bit different from place to place. In my book, I talk about 6 big categories. And these categories are all underneath kind of the banner of change, organizational change. Because in many instances, these are things that I think we need to be striving towards. They're not always things that are already present. For example, to what extent are employees showing up in our guiding documents? So we've got strategic priorities. You
Mhm.
look at many institutions' strategic priorities, their people are not even talked about. So there is no overriding institutional goal about what are we trying to accomplish or how are we trying to treat the people who work here. And so one type of institutional action is to say our guiding documents are going to reflect that we have a commitment to the people who work here.
Yeah.
Another example is looking at some of our policies around hiring, policies around leave,
Mhm.
policies around flex work. And so for me, that's kind of a broader category around humanizing our policies and making
Mhm.
sure we've designed policies for real, living, breathing humans and not what some sociologists call ideal workers. So people that are constantly available, unfailingly loyal, typically don't have a disability, typically don't have a chronic illness, typically don't have caregiving responsibilities. So that's like for many organizations the perfect scenario because you can expect those people to show up every single day, uninterrupted workday. They're going to self-finance professional development. They're going to travel if they need to. They're going to answer the phone whenever you call. And reality is more complicated than that. And so that type of change calls on us to really look at our policies and say, who's this designed for? And who's
Mhm.
being left out as a result? So, as I said, there are these 6 kind of overarching types of change that I call for. There are other things that I think we could be doing. These are just 6 that I think are grounded in the research. They speak to the types of challenges that some of the people that I interviewed for this work brought forward. And I think if we were to make progress, if we were to say, we're going to make a commitment towards these 6 goals, it would make a huge difference. It would be meaningful. It would be substantive. Some people kind of say, okay, what you're talking about here is very big. It does feel overwhelming. And so one of the things that I recommend as part of this work is figure out a way to gather some feedback, gather some data, make one commitment based on that data, turn that into kind of a routine. We are listening, we're making a commitment, we're closing that feedback loop. And if we can do that on a somewhat regular clip, you get this kind of spiraling up effect
Mhm.
where people say, this is a place for whom this isn't just language, it's not just an appreciation day. This is part of the fabric of our operations.
It's very hard for employees who are not cared for to care for students in the way that they need to be. Hopefully, I'm kind of paraphrasing you correctly there. And I think about I talk to a lot of people every day, and I have a friend who's at an institution. Her daughter is having some really serious challenges. She's institutionalized for like part of the day, and
Mhm.
her leadership won't let her work from home so that it's easier for her to go take her daughter and bring her back. So she's driving an hour in the middle of the day to do all of this. And then I talked to another person who was like, it's so flexible here. I can take my kid to basketball practice in the middle of the day. You know, it's I can take my kids to the beach and make up the time after they've gone to bed or whatever. And it's such a difference in the level of commitment that those two people feel for their jobs. Both are working hard. Both are dedicated employees. But I guarantee that the one that's getting this flexibility that allows them to do these things is more deeply committed to the organization than the one that's like, it's rigid. Nope, there's no work from home. Nope, you have to be here from 8 to 5, all of that. And I'm curious, do you have a sense of like how prevalent one over the other is, or what the spectrum looks like of those institutions?
It is very much a spectrum, and there is variance within institutions. And so some of this is about the policy architecture of a given place. And there are very large institutions, for example, that are very decentralized, where there are just pockets where
Mm-hmm.
different policies govern the employee experience. And you've got other places where people would totally be in favor of making a change towards greater flexibility. It does require somebody to change the policy. And so there just has to be somebody who's empowered enough to be able to move that forward. And sometimes it doesn't happen by virtue of there not being anyone there who feels like they have the authority or empowered to be able to bring forward that type of change. And so some of this falls into a space where even senior leaders who are excellent, who are caring, who are well meaning, don't have a full sense of the policies governing people working at the institution. And so they rely heavily on that policy architecture. So, what's permissible versus not? I need somebody to tell me, and I kind of follow that. And their jobs don't necessarily give them enough space to be able to say, okay, this is the policy architecture, but it's not working, or this is something that we need to change. And so it ends up falling low on the priority list relative to things like enrollment and what our marketing budget is going to look like. And we need to hire somebody over here. So I have a certain level of empathy, given that there is a lot of complexity at play here. But there are certainly institutions that have figured this out, that have taken an approach, they've designed a policy, they have made it widely available, they have explained to employees how it works, they've created an online system by which people can apply for it, they provide training to supervisors around how to navigate these conversations. And so it is within the realm of possibility. Occasionally, we've got policies in play that say no to people, and it's just illogical. There is no rationale driving it beyond the fact that it's policy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do try personally, and I try to encourage anybody who's working in the world of higher ed to not accept at face value that something is policy.
Yeah.
Often, what we think of as policy is not policy. There is no policy, or it's based on one person's interpretation of policy, and you get somebody else in the room and they say, oh, that's not how we do it over here.
Yeah.
Or it's a policy that was written 20 years ago. And everybody would be like, oh yeah, we should change this. And we just need to work on getting everybody together to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I've kind of made like my personal brand, just not trusting in my own role, for example, that policy is policy until like I actually see the physical policy and I read it. And otherwise, I'm going to keep on asking and saying, are we sure about this? Because there have been so many instances, even in my first years here, so many instances where somebody has said this is policy. And then we dig a bit and we're like, there's nothing there. Yeah, there's nothing there. So this is, I think, important not just for retaining people, it is important for accessibility purposes. We lose out, I think, on a lot of brilliant people by virtue of our rigidity.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't necessarily have to go to like a full remote work scenario. People are not, in many instances, seeking that. They're just asking for a little bit of flexibility.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like, to me, we're talking about the situation with her daughter is life threatening, right? And that is a very extenuating circumstance that I feel like if her boss is the president of the institution, that president ought to be able to make overrides to that policy, even if it's written in stone. And I'm very much a person that will find the like loophole in the policy or find the like gray area. And I also have been known to say, I didn't hear you. I didn't hear what you just asked me. And I don't intend for you to need to explain it to me anymore. Like this
That's
is
right.
like this. And like, nope, stop talking. I don't know anything about this.
Sometimes we just let things go and it's okay. Now, I understand that there are some that say that could create its own set of problems
Yes.
down the road. But the other thing, just as a leader, that I try to avoid is making decisions based on a hypothetical.
Yes.
And if there's an issue that arises down the road, let's address that issue when it arises. But for me to just kind of right out the bat say no because I'm afraid of X, Y, and Z happening, I don't know that that's the right approach to decision making either.
No. Fear-based decision making is rarely good, rarely based on what it should be based on. I want to press into your idea that employees need to be cared for to care for students, and kind of that rhetoric around caring for students. I wrote about this a couple of weeks ago on LinkedIn, that we are kind of overusing that term belonging. We're not really explaining what belonging looks like. But I'm curious, from your perspective as a scholar, why do you think higher ed is really leaning into messaging about belonging and student care, particularly over the last decade or so?
First of all, I love your series on words that we need to chuck out the way. I have so many instances in my mind where I come across a word and I'm like, I need to tell Jamie about this
You
because
do.
we have so many. There are so many. I think we are constantly in search of concepts, but also just good practice that will enable us to serve students. And so it comes from, in my view, a genuine and heartfelt place of trying to serve students. And we oftentimes have research that suggests to us that students are struggling with a sense of if they matter at an institution, they might be struggling with loneliness. We, of course, are bombarded with information about their use of technology and what effects that has on their mental health. And they are coming to our institutions increasingly having experienced a compounding set of issues well before they even are thinking about going to college. And then our task here is to figure out, how do we show up for them? How do we create an environment where they can do their best work and be successful? However, all of that is incredibly difficult to do. It's difficult work. It takes dedicated employees that themselves are trained and have a particular set of dispositions. It, of course, takes faculty that have a set of dispositions. And in some cases, that we have increased our expectations of faculty in ways that have not matched their preparation. They were never prepared for what they may be called upon to do now. And so it's not the case that they're helpless or there is no hope there. We have to think about, well, how do we provide that type of support and training for them? So we see a similar phenomenon happening to a lesser degree on the employee side, where we've got, interestingly, almost all of the same concepts that we use for student success: engagement, belonging, mattering, basic needs. There is basically the exact same concept on the employee side. Because in most cases, what we're talking about are just kind of fundamental human needs, the types of things that we can say, were we to ensure that some of these ingredients are in play, people are going to be successful here. I think institutions are trying, in some cases on the student side. I think on the employee side, we're seeing much less. And while there might be more rhetoric, it's a lot more kind of boiled down to a single position. So all of a sudden, we're going to have a person who is like the chief people officer, chief belonging officer, and you are asking them to figure out how to provide that type of environment, those ingredients, for a large number of different types of employees. And it's a big ask. So I think, resources are a part of the reason why we fall short. I think obviously rhetoric is easier than action. And so the simplest thing that we can do is to say that this is a commitment without necessarily having the follow through. But a lot of this for me comes down to kind of a mindset shift, which is that emphasis that we have for the student experience, the understanding that we have some responsibility to provide a duty of care to them, we need to bring that over to other people in our community
Mm-hmm.
and to really stop necessarily even thinking about like the student experience is this, the employee experience is this, and think about what's the community experience.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a responsibility to everybody here. What would it look like for us to take that responsibility a little bit more seriously and move beyond kind of move beyond the buzzword and to say, let's really audit our actions and then use that as a point to say, that's probably not enough. That's probably not enough for us to be a high performing organization. And that's another piece that I try to underscore with this, that for me, ultimately, this is not about making everybody happy. I think that's impossible. It is really about how do we create space for us to grow as
Yeah.
people and space for us to grow as institutions and to get better. And I don't think you can do that without having a much more serious discussion about how we are attending to the people who work here.
This episode is brought to you by Encora Connect, built with Element 451. It brings Encora's data science, insights on nearly 8 million prospective students, together with Element 451's AI native CRM and Bolt agent engine. Predictive scores, student mindsets, and funnel insights flow straight into your CRM, where Bolt agents act on them in real time. No CSV exports, no manual handoffs. Learn more at element451.com. I think the most caring community that I was part of in higher ed was at Winston-Salem State. And it was that caring was not just focused on individual populations and silos. It was caring that was much more holistic. So it was like we were truly a community. So the things that we did and said and the actions that we took didn't just apply to one group, nor were they just appropriate to one group. So it was like this very much, you felt like everyone cared about everybody else. Everybody was in everybody else's corner. And it had this like truly a vibe of we're all in this together. Students, employees, faculty, staff. It's the place that I've worked that has had the least amount of that like faculty staff tension where that sometimes can exist. It was so enjoyable to be there and people stayed there. One of my team is just now, that's like I think the first person that's left since I left. Like, is that reasonable to think that that can happen? Or is that just like the magic of this one place?
So I think part of what you're describing there is culture, that there is a set of values and norms around how we show up for each other, how we view each other, how we communicate, that this is just kind of something that we do. And the tricky part about culture, of course, is that oftentimes when we're in it, we take it for granted. It doesn't always seem as visible because this is just what we typically do.
Yeah.
It's not written down anywhere. It's not the law. Everybody who's here for long enough just starts to understand that this is our practice as a community. And yes, it's possible. There are examples all over the place. I'm in a space where I think that's true.
Awesome.
We have a set of practices that we engage in all the time in my college. These are not HR rules. These are not written down, but we know, if someone experiences a loss, if someone is celebrating something, it is how we show up for each other and know each other. And that is culture. And you need people to sustain that and to illustrate it to other people. And I would guess that in every place where this is true, you have certain people who are kind of the elders of that community, and they are particularly skilled at continuing these practices. Sometimes they're unrecognized for it, unrewarded for it, because it's not, I brought in X amount of money or that sort of thing, but it's so crucial. And that's why this is something that leaders ought to pay attention to and try as a general rule to think about surfacing for yourself and for your team. What are some of these things that we do or we want to do that can make a real difference for the experience. I think the challenge gets greater as the institution grows. You're probably not going to have a singular culture realistically.
Yeah.
And so then it comes down to, I manage this team, and I mean, it could be a team with 50 employees, but that culture of care can still be something that is instilled and maintained and invested in within that group. And whatever the wider institution is doing is whatever the wider institution is doing. But within your team, that can be the most meaningful. And that's why we see in trust surveys or engagement surveys or, people saying, I trust my supervisor. I have a ton of respect for my immediate colleagues. I don't know what senior leadership is doing. I have far less trust in them. To me, some of that is natural.
Yeah.
That you're not going to have the same level of trust as you kind of think about further and further levels of the organization. But I think the notion that there's going to be kind of a singular caring community at like a major R1 university,
right.
That's hard to pull off, but we all have our kind of spaces in which we might be able to cultivate that, and it matters for the people who work there.
I see that all the time at those larger institutions where one group of people that report up through one part of the institution are having a very positive experience, and another part's having a very toxic experience. And you see a lot of turnover in one area and not in the other. And all of that. I'm doing a session at the American Marketing Association that's provocatively titled, "I Hate My President, Now What?" And we want to kind of talk through, what do you do if you had there's a leadership change at the institution and suddenly this caring environment isn't so much anymore. It doesn't have to be your president that you hate. It could be a colleague that you're having challenges with. But how do you sort of navigate those situations? And I'm curious from your perspective, if you're somebody who wants to have this culture of care, you're a leader who wants to have that, but your institution's not committed to that, what are things that you can do to cultivate that within your own team?
Yeah, I think part of the answer is contained within the question, right? Which is, my experience of higher education is that there is always some level of disappointment with the organization and with senior leadership. That disappointment is often warranted, and it's often a reflection of reality that we may have a vision for what this place can be and what it's capable of. And that vision may require that we travel this far to get there. And in my time here, we may only get half that distance. And it's not the case that I'm suggesting that we give up on the aspiration or the vision, but we might also have to get a little comfortable with the reality that we are only going to travel so far with this place and our time here. And so as a leader, I say to myself, my goal is to at least get us to that halfway point, as an example, or do what I can to help further us and to shape what I'm capable of shaping in my little zone. And so it does not solve for the fact that there may be someone in a senior leadership position that I think is not doing the right work. It may not solve for the fact that as an institution, I think we're moving in the wrong direction, or we've got some other sets of culture. We have a different culture, a set of values that I am butting heads with. All of that can be true, and we're still trying to do what we can with the people that we're working with in our space. I do want to name that that's really hard, frustrating work. It can be hard enough and frustrating enough that someone says, I don't know that this is the right space for me to do my best work. If I am constantly feeling like I'm pushing the boulder up the hill, I know that pushing the boulder is the right thing and I want to do right by the people who are here, but there's only so long I can individually sustain that. And so I think that that's okay. That's okay for us to name that. You might be at a space where you say, I have done as much as I can here. I don't see changes happening in that wider environment. And so I'm going to now look for something that is a little bit more aligned, understanding that it's not going to be perfect, but here we are. There are instances, though, where we're going to be staying put for a while. We are here. We've
Mm-hmm.
got reason to stay, to keep at it. And so I do think that another part of the conversation for a leader becomes, I need to have an understanding, my sense of what is enough going to look like for
Mm-hmm.
me here. I don't want to burn myself out. I don't want to bring home a sense of misery to my family.
Mm-hmm.
I want to do good work and I want to serve the people that I'm surrounded with. I want to shape the culture here. And so it may be the case that, given the wider environment, we achieve very small wins. And I'm going to have to become okay with that.
Yeah. And celebrating those wins, I think, is really important, that you are actually acknowledging that you have moved the needle, even if it's very small, a very small distance. But just to really highlight that idea of, when I left a toxic environment, I had a group of colleagues from institutions across the country that I was in a cohort with who saw me before I left. And then we had another session after I left. And people were coming up to me and were like, "You look like a different person." They didn't know I had left the environment yet, as I waited to share that with them. And they're like, why you're glowing. What's going on? And I think people do need to hear that like it, a really bad environment can sort of drain the life out of you over time. And there's things that you need to be conscious of. Are you becoming something that isn't who you want to be? And how do you mitigate that? And that's part of what we're going to talk about, is like, when do you mitigate that and when do you walk away from that?
I think
And I
that's
know I have a lot of privilege as someone that could walk away from that situation. Not everybody can.
there's a concept that I really like that comes from a higher education scholar, that is, within any given organization, there's someone that can sometimes become kind of the toxin handler for that
Mm,
place. And and again, there's only so much that someone can absorb before it's too much. And so I do think that there sometimes needs to be that conversation around, this is as far as it's going to go and as much as I'm going to be willing to tolerate. And so it's time to consider what next steps could look like. Again, to your point, there are real limits around what's possible there.
mhm.
And so in that case, there are also some individual questions around self-preservation that I think are totally appropriate.
I tell early career people, my mentees and all of that, like, stop buying handbags and Gucci glasses and whatever, and start scrolling away money that, if you get into a situation like this, you have a cushion to be able to not have to push through it. Because early in my career, I worked in a really toxic environment. I gained 40 pounds. I was sick constantly, and I had no choice. Like, we were living pretty paycheck to paycheck. It was not an economically diverse area, so there wasn't a lot of ability to just move into a different job. And we were fairly placed stuck. And I know I sound like a boomer being like, stop having avocado toast, but like, just try to squirrel away something, so that if you are, and it is bad enough, that you can do that. But I want to flip to the positive,
Yep.
well, the semi positive. I want to ask you, if you're a marketer and you're writing about the student experience, and people are saying, lean into how much we're a caring community, and lean into belonging here, what evidence should we be asking for to be able to back up that claim?
That's a great question. I I suppose there is a related question, which is, there's probably two angles to this, right? Someone who's a prospective student, a prospective employee, a community member, what are they interested in? What do they care about? What's going to resonate with them? And then on the flip side, what is substantive, truthful, demonstrates kind of integrity to the actual experience of this place? And I don't. I'm not a marketer, right? I want to be very clear that you all that are listening to this have more expertise in this space than I do. So I'm going on purely perspective here. There is likely a tension here where you do want to play up the best of this place and what's possible, to share stories of success and imagery of success, and trying to shape a narrative around a place that is stable or on a good path or ascendant. there is, for me, I think, good reason to do that. And for an external community, that might make a lot of sense. But there is another piece of this, which is trying to remain true to the essence of a place so that should someone then try to come here and interact with it, there is a sense of alignment between what was pitched to me versus what is reality here.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose some of that involves drilling down into the essence of a place and really trying to understand what is our unique value, what is it that we do exceptionally well, um, and then trying to figure out what piece of that is going to be most resonant with somebody who's looking at the institution. For me, though, there's a big piece of this, but in terms of distinguishing external communication and internal communication. And for employees, I think a lot of us are generally going to understand that there's a reason why we've got an external communication strategy that we do. The question then becomes like, how are we communicating internally? What kind of stories are we telling to each other? How could that narrative ensure that we are, in fact, drawing from and basing that in someone's real lived experience? And importantly, how are we providing real useful information to the people who work here? So beyond kind of the gimmick, people I think within the organization are saying, I don't want the PR piece of this. And I'm going to tell you one like concrete way for me that this shows up that I think could be an easy fix. I'm at an organization where I don't think there is literally any electronic or written communication from our senior leadership that is not heavily vetted by someone in such a way that like I have no idea what the legitimate perspective, value, or voice of my senior leader is, because it's all just the same kind of generic
platitude.
Speak.
Yeah.
Yes, that this is the great stuff that's happened. This is the great stuff that we're planning to do. It's going to be a great semester. Thank you for your work. Boom. That's kind of it.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of employees for whom like that's it. That is all they hear from that person. They have no direct interaction, no opportunity to have direct interaction. And so I think that's an example of our external communication strategy also just blending right into the internal communication strategy and treating employees as just another kind of community constituency where we might think about there being some real differentiated approaches that we take. Okay, so I just threw that out there. I want to know what you think about this as an expert, and like, what am I missing, or what nuance could we add to this?
So for this like communications from senior leadership, right? So I have been the writer of communications like that for 5 different leaders. And there's this level of risk tolerance that these leaders have, right? So some of them are willing to come out and say the hard things. And some of them are like, I don't have a lot of political bandwidth right now, or I'm on thin ice with this population. I need to write the safest thing possible. I think that's a piece of it. And I have worked for people on the far ends of those spectrums. At Winston-Salem State, that dude would say anything. He knew who he was and he felt like he wanted to be himself. And that's why we loved him. But I would also say that there's a tendency in higher ed to look at what somebody else is doing and then do that too. And that's how we get this common language that we're all talking about a close-knit campus community and dedicated faculty and an inspiring environment. And it's almost like a copy paste. You could look at a bunch of different websites and see the same language. And in part, it's because we're pressed for time. In part, it's because it's perceived low risk. But I think I was talking to a friend of mine. I don't know if she'd be okay with me saying what institution she's at. Her president is pressing on their comms people that she wants to be more like vibrant and less platitudinous and less like stuffy sounding. And those leaders, I think, get the fact that something you mentioned way earlier, it's natural for people to have a level of mistrust for senior administration. And I think part of that, and I'm curious about your thoughts as a scholar of this, is because they don't actually know them. And
Hmm.
those communications that look like they're from a real human, that's when people feel a little bit more like they know them. I mean, I think every leader should be like Elwood and go to every basketball game and go to every concert and walk across campus and eat in the student dining hall and do all of that. But, short of that, if the only interaction you're having is this communication, and you could put any institution's president's name on that communication and nobody would know the difference, I think you're not going to break down that mistrust. But I'd love to hear if you feel like, what do you think causes that mistrust? Is that a piece of it?
Yeah, I think that's a piece of it. The distance that people experience, I think, is certainly a factor. You've got, again, this is going to vary by campus, vary by leader, but there are times where people would say, like, I've never seen this person before, and so I don't know who they are or what they're about. And so any opportunity to close that distance a little bit, I think, can be really important. And there's probably a dimension of there being a communication strategy that is very clearly designed for the people who work here, that is centered around services that they could take advantage of and opportunities available to them, probably trying to vary up that communication strategy. I mean, we still heavily lean on a weekly listserv.
Yep.
And if you read it, great. And if you don't read it, then you're not as aware of some of these things. But I would love and would be curious to hear about other ways that places have innovated in this space. I know that there are campuses that are large enough that their HR or people functions have their own communications specialists whose job it
Mm-hmm.
is just to help the people who work there know about services, know about opportunities, figure out how they can attend events. And I think that can be crucial because there are a lot of great things happening that employees could take advantage of. Half the time they just don't know. And so I think that can be really, really important and shows some level of investment on a part of the institution that we care about the people who work here in such a way that we're going to try to help them take full advantage of being at a campus. That's one of the still unique value propositions of working in higher ed is working
Yeah.
at it's still attractive to people. And over time, we have chipped away at that value proposition by, in my view, making it harder to come to campus, harder to park on campus, harder to enjoy being here, harder to attend events. And so that's one of the things that I think we could double down on, is just to say, if we continue to think of this as a community that our employees could take advantage of, that's something we can play up and help us in kind of competition for talent. But again, some of that is premised on people feeling like it is available to them and knowing about it. So there should be, I think, there could be room for a communication strategy that's much more internal, that's going to look a little different. The external communication strategy can be what it is and stay that way. But there is, I think, a good open question in my mind about how does that look and how do you practice that internal communication strategy well.
And I think a lot of institutions, I do a lot of organizational assessments. So I'm looking at people's marketing communications organization charts all the time. And I often don't see someone titled for internal communications. And there isn't like one person who gets up in the morning and thinks about how to communicate with their internal audiences. And I think that's a misstep. I have an episode about this that I did a couple of years ago, but how important it is. Even if you're looking at this from the external perspective, those are your first brand ambassadors, like the people who live and breathe your campus. I remember when I was at Miami, I had an employee who'd been there for 30 plus years. I remember he said, I just feel like President Crawford and the work that we're doing is changing the perception. I'm proud to walk around with my Miami cap. Whereas before, some people would bring up some sort of negative news story, or I just wasn't feeling the vibe of being proud I worked here. And now I'm so proud I work here. And I think a piece of that is Like Greg, that was a large school, right? 22,000 students. Greg was everywhere at the same time. I don't know. That man didn't sleep. He was at everything. If he stopped by my office, it took him a half hour to get to me because he was talking to every person he passed by, asking them questions, teasing them, like trying to be personable. If you go on to like Miami University Reddits, students are talking about like talking to him all the time, petting his dogs, knowing his wife, visiting his house. And it is possible at a larger institution, but that man didn't sleep. But I
Mm,
think, that made people, I think, feel a little bit more warm and fuzzy about the institution as a whole because we had a strong internal communication strategy that involved more than just written things. It was Greg was out there. All the VPs had to attend athletic events, gallery openings, plays, all of that. We wanted to, but he really wanted all of us to be seen as human beings and not just these like mustache twirling villains. And I
sure.
think it paid off. At least, while I was there, I felt like people felt valued.
The
Yeah.
other thing that I think about on the communications front is sometimes goals become the narrative and the only narrative. And so you can find yourself at a place where it feels like the totality of campus life revolves around enrollment.
Yeah.
Nothing matters except enrollment.
Mm-hmm.
Every conversation somehow comes back around to enrollment. And and so therefore when you're in conversation with the campus community, you got a group of people together, you've got senior leadership who are talking, somehow it always comes back to that narrative arc, and it has a way of reducing the purpose of the institution in ways that I think give people question in their brains, the employees there, around, well, what is this place about? What is this place about? Is it really, are we literally just here as an enrollment machine?
Yeah.
And I think that can lead to some additional challenges that are avoidable. Even if we say enrollment is our number one goal, it doesn't have to be the only thing that we ever talk about as
Right.
being important here. Um, Similarly, I have this feeling that occasionally the communications of an institution is basically kind of like all we do is win, win, win. And so I would be in faculty senate, for example, the chancellor would come and he would have like, here is our enrollment. Here are the rankings for some of our top programs. Here are the new buildings we're building. This athletic team is doing well. Things are great. I hope you all are well. And then would sit down. And all of that's great. But at the same time, everybody who works there is kind of like, but what we do is not just that. And those wins that you're listing, none of that success feels like it trickles down to me.
Mm.
It always feels like more,
Yeah.
and things have gotten more complex, and we're working extremely hard and we're seeing good benefits from that. But like, there was never a moment where they then said, as a result of these wonderful things happening, we want to make an investment. And we're going to be trying to do this around professional development budgets,
Mm-hmm.
or we've had now a string of successes and we've been able to squirrel away some money to address compensation equity. That's the that full kind of loop moment where we say, yeah, we've got some wins, and we've got some wins that are going to trickle down to the people who work here.
That is so, oh, that's like hitting me right now. Like I was talking to someone who, um, they eliminated a position, but they didn't lose the funding. And somebody took on almost all of the duties of that position. And they wanted to give that person like a 25% raise. And they were told they could give a 5% raise. And meanwhile, the VP in that division got a 28% raise that same year. And it's like this idea of like, we're only rewarding the top of the org chart for the good things that happen. And for this person to have absorbed another job. And I'm telling you, there's a 10-time difference between their pay to start with. And they're only seen as worthy of 5% raise, which is probably $3,000. the success wasn't because of the VP. You know what I mean? It was everybody working together. And I feel just such a sense of injustice about that. That like the people who are paid the least and are doing the work are not being recognized financially for that work, and what that feels like when then you see, because these are public institutions, the VP's 28% raise, and how that feels like just a kick.
Yeah. And so for me, that's, as we're thinking about kind of what does it mean to care? What does it mean to care at the level of the institution? That's a good illustration, I think, of there are moments where we want to be able to say, we do care about the people here. And I think it is a genuine sentiment. And we have a staff appreciation day, and it's a genuine appreciation for the work that they do. When you were to ask employees, though, what is it that they're thinking in their brains? Is this a place that listens to me? Is this a place that cares about my experience? They're going to point to those moments where we had an influx of money and we spent it on something very distant from the employee experience.
Yeah.
Or we had all these successes, but I never felt that in my work. Or we had all these successes and our leadership got a bump and we didn't. That's the more substantive institutional action that they're going to be thinking about much more readily than even a genuine sentiment of care from a well-meaning leader.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a leader say like, no, we can't do raises, but we can have a pizza party. And I was like, we're not doing the pizza party then. Like I'm not doing it.
I talked to someone who got an email from their institutional leadership, and it was like this big deal email, super celebratory, announcing something like a 1.5% raise. And the point that they made, which I think is interesting and worth considering, is it may have been better to just not have even sent an email or that type of email around this being like such a celebratory moment. And it's hard because, right, this is a good thing. It's a good thing for people to get a raise, even a 1.5% raise. Great. I'm all for it. But there is something about the disconnect there between the messaging around it and, oh my gosh, this is a fabulous thing that we've been able to do, and then the reality of it. And I don't know what the right approach to that is, but it does raise this kind of interesting question about how do we communicate some of these types of changes or initiatives, and in light of what the real experience might be for someone.
Yeah. Rah, 1.5%. And with inflation at like whatever the inflation is right now.
I think, there's this weird line between this is good news we should announce, and this also verges on insulting. Mm-hmm. And I get it. It's a hard tension, I think, to navigate. So I'm not suggesting I have a good answer, but rather just to raise it as something we can consider.
From a Marcom perspective, I would urge listeners to remember that the people reading these communications are not dumb. Like we can't like, oh, if we wrap it up in pretty enough language, it's going to feel even better than it is. And it's like, no, we're talking about people with PhDs. Like this isn't, they didn't get to be working at an institution because they're naive or dumb.
And the other side of this, I had a really great question the other day from a bunch of HR professionals, which is there is going to be a certain segment of the population that you're communicating to that they're always going to be a little bit curmudgeon-y.
Yes. Yes.
No matter what you say, no matter how you wrap it, they're always going to be unhappy about something. And I think that is 100% true. We could probably make an educated guess as to which segment of the university population is most likely to fall in that boat. And we don't necessarily have to change or try to convince that group. We're likely not going to do it. And so, yes, we've got incredibly smart people sometimes whose own criticality gets in their way. And we may not necessarily, like I said, shape everything around trying to please that particular group, but there are lots of people, yes, who are discerning and they're perceptive and they care about this place. And they're raising some good questions for us to be thinking about. And I do think that there's a space for savvy communicators to be really, really helpful in that.
Yeah. I could talk to you all day, Kevin. But I'm running up on an hour. Where can people find you if they want to get your book, if they want to hear you speak, if they want to bring you to their campus?
So the book is available through Johns Hopkins University Press and Amazon and all those places, and it is available as an audiobook as well. I have a website that's drkevinrmcclure.com where you can learn a little bit more about speaking opportunities. And so I still do campus visits and speak at conferences. I do a column at the Chronicle of Higher Education called Working Better. And so there's some additional work and writing that I do through that. And lastly, I have a LinkedIn newsletter that's also called The Caring University, where I talk about leadership and all sorts of stuff that come to mind.
He's a great follow on LinkedIn. I strongly recommend that you follow him. Listeners, as always, you can find me on LinkedIn at Jaime Hunt, JaimeHunt. You can find my website at solvehighered.com. My book is heartoverhypebook.com. And I really would appreciate it if you reached out. If you have guest ideas, if you're interested in being a guest, please reach out. And until then, let's go bust some silos. Listeners, can I ask you a quick favor? If you enjoy this show, take a moment to give it a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I'm a type A eldest daughter, so positive feedback is basically my love language. I also genuinely love hearing from listeners. You can find me at LinkedIn at Jaime Hunt. That's JaimeHunt. And yes, I am named after the Bionic Woman. You can also find me at solvehighered.com. Say hello, share a thought, pitch an idea. Don't be shy. I genuinely love hearing from you.